Hi, I'm Kara, and this channel is about human connection and navigating change in your life, in organizations, and more broadly for collective well-being. Today, I'm going to talk about the link between connection and change and why both are relevant to anyone interested in personal transformation, leadership, collective change, or all of the above. Now, as a quick recap, I previously touched on connection as connection to self, connection to others, and connection to something greater than yourself, and then change in relation to self, organizations, and systems. What we're going to talk about today is how connection and change are linked. So I think that connection reinforces personal transformation and vice versa, and connection reinforces positive systems change and vice versa. But first, let's take a step back. How, why, how did I even get to this place? So, I'm an optimist, but I started with a pretty dismal view. It goes back to when I was working in geopolitics, covering waves of populism through Europe, big changes in the US, and ongoing conflicts in the Middle East and beyond. I started becoming quite interested in the link between personal and collective fear and how this was exploited in and influencing politics. I was curious to understand how the fears of individuals were exploited by politicians, changing election outcomes and entire systems in real time. I became curious about how fear, ego, and trauma could influence people at the top of global leadership. And without getting too specific, there are some current and many historical examples about how certain incidents in global leaders' past, not necessarily big ones, but any leaders, have influenced the leadership style they became known for. And I was curious about the impact that generational trauma might have on social and political outcomes. It's hard to imagine that entire populations who've endured deep conflict and hardship wouldn't be influenced in their ways of thinking or being. The natural human reaction is to be in survival mode, which influences how you see the world. How might having whole populations in survival mode influence how they vote and the extent to which they're able to be exploited and manipulated? I was also covering extremism and remembered an article that I saw in university about how one of the biggest tools against radicalization in some countries were men's mothers. And there are a lot of programs in this and research into how that could help. And there's further research looking at the link between unemployment and lack of social support and belonging and people who then went on to join radical groups. So it seems then that a person's self-awareness, sense of community, fears, and emotional regulation toolkit has the potential to influence a lot more than just their personal life. It could potentially lead to broader collective impact in terms of how they vote, how they lead, and how vulnerable they are to political exploitation, radicalization, and manipulation. In turn, the systems and structures that we live within influence the extent to which we're forced into survival mode. The more challenging the economic, social, and political environment, the more people are forced to live in survival mode just to get a roof above their heads. But if the economic, social, and political environment helped them get out of survival mode and enabled them to be more relaxed and in a state of well-being, would they elevate different leaders to power? What might be the collective social, economic, and political outcomes? There are lots of people who do a lot of work in this area, and there's so much more research to explore. But Dr. Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal, further highlights how the systems and structures of our world aren't really conducive to well-being for the people or for environment. You usually have to push back pretty hard against our current world to be able to gain a sense of well-being. But what might be possible for us if we did have a world that supported well-being for everybody? And that brings me back to these diagrams. If you're only listening to this, I'll describe them as best I can. So, how connected we are to our own sense of self, including our roots, our culture, and our community, helps lead to positive personal transformation. You can deeply self-reflect and continue growing in a values-aligned way. We evolve, we grow, and this solid connection to self makes this evolution smoother with fewer obstacles. And as you continue to evolve, you can increase your capacity to connect more deeply with yourself, to others, and to a sense of meaning. So your personal connection and your personal transformation are mutually reinforcing. Similarly, a deeper connection to yourself, to others, and to something beyond yourself increases your capacity and potentially your desire to make positive change. Now, that's not for everybody, but this is a generalization. And it doesn't mean massive change, but collective change takes collective effort. And the reasoning here is that when we have the capacity, humans tend to find meaning and fulfillment via positive contributions beyond themselves. Your contributions count. So if you have greater connection, greater systems change, this then increases the opportunity for you and others to connect. But how? Well, the positively changed systems are more conducive to well-being. For example, if you're a parent with a toddler and a full-time job or part-time job, or just with a toddler, your days are probably extremely full. In this economic climate, a lot of the time both partners likely need to work. The toddler might be at daycare, you might be doing long hours to pay the bills, have a long commute, exorbitant daycare fees, doing the second shift of parenting every second that you're not at work. The opportunities you have to stop and take a breath are understandably few and far between. But, and yes, this might be an idealistic view, if our systems supported greater work-life balance, free childcare, and I know this is a big one, but affordable housing so that people can live within an hour of their workplace, have more outdoor spaces as well, then parents might have more time to pause, take a breath, nurture their connections, and potentially contribute in their communities in a new way. But this is absolutely not a requirement. Or take the student or young professional, stressed by housing, debt, work requirements, studying and getting ahead in their career in order to just afford rent and a roof above their head. If they had access to tools that helped them manage stress, supported them in finding work that leveraged their natural strengths and aligned with their interests, and they didn't have such crazy financial pressures, they too would be able to lead happier, healthier lives and genuinely consider how they want to contribute rather than just being in the adrenaline of survival mode. Now, this isn't for everyone. It's certainly not the path that everyone will walk down in terms of wanting to give back to the community in big ways, but we're not just looking at big ways. However, if our world can move towards a place where you don't have to fight against things to gain well-being, but it's just inbuilt, what kind of skills and strengths might we all be able to unlock and collectively benefit from as a society? Other than, of course, a happier, healthier population, which in itself is enough. So to recap, connection and change on both a personal and collective level are mutually reinforcing, which is why we have to consider both. We can't look at personal development in a vacuum. We cannot escape our